Hello, I'm Maria Hall Brown, and this is LA Currents. Well, it's that time of year where LA City plans its budget for fiscal 2021, but there is no such thing as business as usual these days. Fortunately, I'm joined by Councilman Paul Krekorian, who is the chair of the Finance and Budget Committee, and he can walk us through how things are going to work this year. All right, so just very simply, kind of a primer as to, what is included in the budget. Obviously, in any budget, there are expenses and there are resources. So in Los Angeles, the second largest populous city in the world, or country, excuse me, there are a lot of things they have to consider. So big picture, what are the huge expenditures? What are the huge resources to pay against those expenditures?
Well, you're right, Maria. In a city of our size, obviously the budget is an exceptionally complex beast. Mm-hmm. And about almost half of our budget goes to public safety directly. Police, fire, emergency preparedness, and so on. About another quarter of the budget goes to what people think of as keeping the city clean, whether it's sanitation, blight eradication, graffiti removal, building and safety, inspections, those sorts of things. So the majority of the budget goes to those basic core services that people associate with the city. And then everything else goes to parks, libraries, transportation, all of the other things that you associate with the city. But the bulk of it is in those core services of public safety and sanitation.
Okay, and so taxpayer dollars obviously help, but then there are other resources to be able to finance these services.
Right. The majority of, or the biggest revenue sources that the city has are property tax, sales tax, our business tax, and the temporary occupancy tax that comes from hotel stays. And then in addition to that, permit fees and all of the fees and fines kind of things as well. And then to some extent, we of course get transfers of funds from other government entities as well, federal support, grant funding from the state government, and so forth.
Well, what a difference a year makes. Last year, the city basically celebrated eliminating any kind of structural deficits. It was in a really good, solid fiscal position, great reserve fund, and this is a different realm right now. So what are some of the key changes? Obviously, Mayor Garcetti puts a proposal out to the council. So what are some of the major changes that the mayor has offered at this point?
Well, of course, in this unprecedented environment that the world is in because of COVID-19, there's tremendous unpredictability about this budget. I've been budget chair now for 8 years, and even when we were still in the Great Recession, there has never been a time like this where our revenues are so unpredictable, our expenses are so unpredictable, what support we may get or not get from the federal government in terms of stimulus and other things, completely unpredictable. And we usually have a very precise method of predicting revenues based on historical experience. Sure. We can just shred all that historical experience and throw it out the window right now because we're in uncharted territories. So the mayor's budget proposal is appropriately extremely conservative. He's projecting revenue growth of less than 2%, whereas in recent years we've been projecting over 5% annual growth, and that makes a great deal of difference in our budget because, as I mentioned, most of our revenue sources are economically sensitive. Sure. When there's economic growth, we get a lot more sales tax. Property tax goes up. The businesses have more gross receipts, so there's more gross receipts tax. People are traveling, so we get our hotel tax. People are building things, so they're paying permit fees. All of those things happen when there's a vibrant economy. When there's not a vibrant economy, and when we're facing the economic catastrophe that the world is facing right now, all of those revenue sources decline dramatically. So the mayor has proposed, among other things, furloughing our public employees, equivalent to about 10% of their salary, which is a very significant kind of reduction. And there have been a number of other reductions that he's proposed, all of which will be difficult, painful results for the people of Los Angeles, but all of which are necessary at this point, I believe, in order to keep the city financially solvent.
Specifically to the furloughs, what exactly, I mean, as it stands right now, he's saying 26 days of furlough. So what does that mean, and what category of employee, civic employee, is he sort of looking at when it comes to that?
So that will apply to most city employees. It will not apply to sworn police officers or sworn firefighters. But civilians in the police department and other civilian employees, for the most part, will be furloughed. There will be exceptions. The mayor's already proposed exceptions in sanitation and otherwise because of the essential public health aspect. That they can't have a reduction, or else there will be a significant public health crisis. But in just about every other area, there's going to be this reduction. And 26 days is equivalent, as I said, to about 10% of their work for the year.
Okay, so in addition to the furlough, he's also he's declared a state of fiscal emergency. What does that literally mean, as far as, or what does it legally mean? Because obviously to put that language into the budget means something very specific. Is there, what is the realm of what that exactly means?
Well, it facilitates a number of steps to respond to this crisis, including furloughs themselves.
Okay.
So there has to be that kind of a declaration before we can make such a dramatic change to the workforce and to their livelihood. So that's the main import of it. It gives greater latitude to the mayor and to the council in developing kind of emergency response to the situation that we're in.
So in general, when you're looking at, in just the budget at large, there are different major funds that make up the budget, and obviously they're funds within funds. So I don't want to simplify it, because as you mentioned, it's extremely complicated, especially a $10 million budget for 4 million people. So there are basically 4 funds. There's a general fund, there's a reserve fund, a special fund, and then a budget stabilization fund. So how do all of these funds come into play, and what do they mean to just the citizens of Los Angeles?
Sure. Well, let me complicate it for you a little bit more.
Oh, good.
We also have, of course, the DWP, which the city owns,
Sure.
which is entirely separate. It's called a proprietary department, so ratepayer funds are kept entirely separate from what we're talking about.
Okay.
The airport and the Port of Los Angeles, the city owns those, but all of their revenues stay within the airport and the port. They
Okay.
don't come
They
to
don't come back to
support
the
the city's budget. Neither does the DWP revenues. So the city's budget, what people think of as the budget that results in the city services that they count on, is made up of a general fund, which this year will be about $6.5 billion. And the general fund is what we spend on most of those services, police, fire,
Got it.
all of those sorts of things. Special funds are generated by revenue sources that can only be spent on certain things. So for example, when a developer pays a fee, that fee can only be used for costs relating to that development, for example. Certain fines can only be, like a traffic parking fine, can only be spent in parking-related expenditures. Certain taxes that the taxpayers agreed to are specified to be spent on certain purposes. Those are called special funds, and they can't be moved around a great deal. They have to be spent for limited purposes. Now, the reserve fund and the budget stabilization fund are essentially the city's rainy day accounts.
Okay.
These are what we use to ensure the stability and the sustainability of our budget. And I'm very pleased to say, if there's any good news in the budget this year, it's that in the time that I've been budget chair for the last 8 years, we have methodically built up the largest reserve fund in the history of the city of Los Angeles. We started the budget stabilization fund under my chairmanship, first time we've ever had one. $100 million in the budget stabilization fund, and then a reserve fund that exceeded 5% of the budget for the first time in history. So those two things taken together give us the ability to ride out downturns in the economy without having to make the kinds of draconian cuts that we did have to make back in the wake of the 2008 economic collapse, because there wasn't a significant reserve fund then. There was no budget stabilization fund. So when the economic collapse hit, the council was faced, and the mayor at the time was faced with just horrendous choices about cuts, and we had to reduce the size of the workforce, smallest that had been since Mayor Bradley was mayor. There was a proposal actually to lay off 6,000 public employees at that time. Thankfully, we didn't do that, but we've methodically balanced the budget since then, and at the same time built up the strongest budget reserves in history. And as a result, the credit rating agencies throughout the country, when they assess Los Angeles's financial health, they rate us very strongly, primarily because of that. And that's going to be a great help as we move forward into this very difficult budget year.
I'm old enough to remember when OC went into bankruptcy, when Orange County went into bankruptcy due to bad investments. So are all those funds sort of in an investment portfolio, or are they just in an interest-bearing account living somewhere?
So the day-to-day cash of the city is in fact held in bank accounts and bank account equivalents. They pay very little in terms of interest, in some cases nothing, but we have to maintain those funds in very conservative, stable, prudent places. We can't take risks with the taxpayers' money that way.
With this pandemic and all of the things that have taken place within the city in order to manage it, have you had to dip into any of those funds in order to help pay for this?
We have indeed,
Okay.
and it's been an emergency. We have had to keep people alive, and so we've had no choice but to begin spending out of the reserve fund, to borrow from some special funds. Those funds will need to be repaid. But this has been necessary in order to do the essential work that we've had to do just to address the immediate needs of this COVID crisis. Now, it's my great hope that many of those expenditures will eventually be reimbursed by the federal government because they are emergency response expenditures. So we hope that we'll be able to get FEMA funding and other things to reimburse many of those categories of expenses. But again, that's one of the fundamental unknowables as we go into the budget. How much will be reimbursed? When will it happen? It's anybody's guess.
And again, saying that there is no such thing as business as usual, you still have to go into this budget process right now. You still have to come up with a plan in this arena of unknown. And so how does that process normally work, and how is that process potentially going to work this time?
Well, in a typical budget year, the Budget and Finance Committee spends about 2 weeks in daily meetings reviewing the mayor's budget proposal. And we bring in every head of every department. We bring in all the staff from those departments that can tell us about the line items in their budget, respond to our questions, and we really go through the budget with a fine-tooth comb. The public participates in every single one of those meetings. We have our labor partners at the table. That was another thing I innovated as chair, to have our public employee representatives there participating in the budget process. We have all of our neighborhood council budget advocates participating in this. So it's a very intensive review that spans over the course of weeks, and we have literally hundreds of people in the room. Well, obviously we can't do that in this environment. And so for basic health reasons, we can't have a typical budget hearing. But also, that in-depth analysis, in my view, would be fruitless right now because we don't have the information about revenues that we need to have to make intelligent assessments about each of those departmental budgets. That will come, but the coincidence of timing is that right when we have to prepare our budget is exactly when the impacts of this COVID crisis are hitting, and we can't yet predict the economic impacts that we'll have in the coming years. So this will be an ongoing process that will continue beyond our normal budget season probably well into the next fiscal year, where we'll continue to reassess and get the lay of the land of where we are and how much the economy is coming back and what our revenue projections will likely be.
So given what you just said, are you still going to actively listen to advocacy for different line items in the budget for your constituents and the constituents of the rest of your council members?
Absolutely, as we always do. In the time that I've been budget chair, pretty much anybody who has an interest in the budget has been able to provide input either at our meetings or by meeting with me in my office. We will be on Monday, March 11th. May 11th. We'll be having a report, basically, a comprehensive report about the budgets, the proposed budget, and our economic predictions and so forth from the CAO and the CLA and the mayor's budget team, who will be there to report to the Budget and Finance Committee. And the public will be able to participate in that meeting as well. It'll be socially distanced, we'll be in remote locations, but we will have an opportunity for calling in and observing that meeting. And then throughout the year, we have financial status reports that in a typical year we do 4 times a year. This year we'll do many more, so that we can continue to have updates about what the results of furloughing has been. What are our actual revenues compared to our projected revenues? What sorts of impacts are these cuts having? Where have we had increased expenses because of COVID? All of those things are going to be questions that we'll be reviewing throughout the budget year on a regular basis and adjusting and revising the budget as we go.
So it's not set in stone. It will have a little bit of variations, but are there things that are set in stone, like just general concerns about cutbacks in regards to public safety? You said police and fire is one of the largest, basically the largest part of the budget. Is all of that stable? Can people be assured that that's going to be as is, if not more solid?
So no budget is ever exactly set in stone. I usually think of it more as a roadmap. Okay. It's a plan for how we will proceed through the year with expenditures based on anticipated revenues. But it's always we're always revising it and adjusting as we go. That being said, obviously it's going to be a lot more adjustments this year. But one thing that the mayor has done in his proposed budget, which I think will probably have broad support within the council, is no reduction in our sworn firefighters and our sworn police officers, because that is so essential to the public's safety and to keeping people alive, ambulance response time and so forth. So it is unlikely, I think, that there will be any cuts in sworn and in police patrol, but I have to say that I'm not willing to start predicting what may or may not happen in the coming year until we have a better sense of how quickly Los Angeles will emerge from the place that we're at right now economically.
Speaking of quickly, a lot of things were put in place to face the pandemic and the aftermath, et cetera, like shelters and hygiene stations and a different process for handling medical emergencies, et cetera. Are those part of your considerations and the committee's considerations about what should stay and be paid for that may not have even existed in this fiscal year?
Right, and you're exactly right. Some of those things happened really quickly.
Right.
And so it's my hope that many of those expenses will be reimbursed because they were emergency responses because of the public health crisis by the federal government. But in addition, it's also my hope that many of these really important steps that we took in response to the COVID crisis some of them may become permanent solutions to our larger and ongoing homelessness problem and some other challenges that we have. And in that respect, if reimbursable expenses can help us address that longer term problem, that would be a good thing to help us get on a stronger footing in responding to to the ongoing challenge that we face of homelessness.
And on the flip side of that coin, I know that there are some initiatives, in particular environmental initiatives, that are very close to your heart. I mean, and we had, as a city, had decided no more plastic bags. You know, we were making some really substantive moves. Obviously, things are at pause right now because of what's gone on. We all are now getting new bags at the grocery store, et cetera. There was a big push towards public transportation. And now are people maybe feeling the safety of the car is a better route? I mean, so I would imagine that there are things that may have to wait as well.
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
I would say also that as the city looks to emerge from this economic trough that we're in, our commitment to the environment and the environmental economy and the jobs that creates really give us an opportunity to expedite coming out of this economic crisis as well. But you're right, we don't yet know how society is going to change.
Sure.
There are some fundamental things that are probably going to be different. And some of those may be better. For example, now that we're also comfortable with this telecommuting option, that may very well take people off the road permanently. There will be some reduction in the amount of trips that we take, I think, because people are now comfortable with the idea of having Zoom meetings, for example. We don't know. We don't know how society will be changed because of this permanently. But I think while we may have had to make some emergency steps with regard to some of the environmental initiatives that you just mentioned, I don't think that this city's commitment to the environment will be changed in any way. I think this city has led the country, in some respects led the world in many of the environmental initiatives that we've launched, and I think we'll continue to do so.
And speaking of the world, I mean, Los Angeles is literally the gateway to the West. I mean, it is such an important conduit for so many things that actually may not even be relative to what happens within this city. I mean, things that go export, import, et cetera. What are the concerns? And you're talking about revenue sources, but there are additional revenue sources that I imagine are at risk because of the fact that the world has shifted, people are not traveling, businesses altered somewhat. So there are a lot more things at stake than just property taxes, et cetera.
Yeah, in some respects, I try to be optimistic about the future of our economy, and this is certainly going to be difficult for the world for the foreseeable future. I also think that Los Angeles has an opportunity to outpace the rest of the country in terms of our economic recovery. Okay. We did, in our recovery from the Great Recession, we had an enormous economic boon after that. And I think we have the opportunity to do that as well, for many of the reasons that you say. Because as international trade resumes, Los Angeles is the essential city in America for international trade. When it comes to international travel, LAX has been the busiest destination airport in the world for years now, and we've been breaking all records until this for traffic through the airport. So Los Angeles is a global city. It's the capital of the Pacific Rim. And I think in many respects, as things start to pick up, they will pick up disproportionately in Los Angeles because of that. And that's going to be to the benefit of our local economy and the people whose jobs depend on that local economy.
So, as chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, and your optimistic attitude about how everything is going to eventually work out, you are joined by others. So who makes up this committee, and what are their roles?
And just to be clear, I can be optimistic, but when I put my budget chair hat on, I can't be optimistic
there
anyway.
Very realistic.
You have to
right.
be hard-nosed but I'm blessed really in the time that I've been on chairing the budget committee to have really had some remarkably talented committed members of that committee. And right now, the committee is made up of my Vice Chair, Curran Price, as well as Council members Mike Bonin, Bob Blumenfield, and Paul Krekorian. The latter three have served for the majority of the time that I've been chair on the committee. So we really have this, we have a good feel for it, and all of the members have really shown a real commitment to this difficult work of striking the balance between delivering the services that we all want to deliver while still maintaining the kind of financial responsibility that we have to future generations as well.
Okay, and as we mentioned really early in our conversation, the process is different this year, but what's the timeline of it?
Well, so in a typical budget year, we would be finishing up our budget hearings around now and ready to deliver a budget report to the City Council, to the full council, so that the full council could then vote on any changes that the council would like to make to our proposals. And that takes a couple days, and then we authorize a budget and we're done. And then we put that away until the fiscal year begins. Well, that's not what's going to happen this year.
Right.
So we will have the May 11th hearing, still to be determined whether or not there will be a report out of that hearing that gets heard in the council, whether the council will take up the full budget. We're discussing that with Council President Martinez right now as to what the best step forward is. But regardless of what happens in the next few weeks, it is a certainty that the Budget and Finance Committee and the Council will be continuing to work on the budget over the next months and well into the next fiscal year. So whatever we do right now will not be the finished budget product. It's going to be, think of it as a rough first draft that we'll have to continue to work on as we gain additional information and as we emerge from this crisis.
As Governor Newsom said a long time ago, going back is going to be not a light switch off and on, it's going to be a dimmer up and down. So exactly what you were saying, there'll be adjustments made the whole time. All right, so obviously this is an incredibly important issue for all of the citizens of Los Angeles. And if they have something to say, or they really want to keep up on what's going on, or they really want to have, some inside information, is there a good route for them to take to be able to be either a part of this process or at least informed of what's happening?
Sure. Probably the best way would be to go to my website and sign up for my newsletter, where we keep people informed that way. And I think staying in touch with their respective council members is an important part of this as well, to let each member know what the priorities are of the people of Los Angeles. But at this point, I've been so proud of the people of Los Angeles and how they have responded to this crisis, and how people have, for the most part, even in these crisis times, tried to help one another and been patient and understanding with the emergency nature of this. I hope that that same spirit will apply as we move forward with the budget as well, because it is going to be one of those all hands on deck kind of difficult challenges for the entire city as we move forward.
So you have an interesting perspective in the fact that, you've been a servant to Los Angeles now for a long time, but you also have state assembly experience. Could you imagine what must be going on up in Sacramento right now?
It's a little bit, because when I was there, we were facing budget catastrophe as well. It was during the time of the international meltdown. But no one has ever seen anything like this. There's no precedent for it. You add to that the social distancing requirements and just the work of the Capitol. I don't know how they're going to be able to function. So it is extraordinarily difficult. I have to say that the legislature and the governor have stepped up, though, and really realized how much local government is on the front line of this,
right,
and have been extraordinary partners. Our legislative delegation have all been really really very supportive and positive. And of course, the governor has been one of our nation's leaders, along with Mayor Garcetti, in really setting the standard for how government should be responding to this.
Well, Councilman Krekorian, thank you for all you do, and I wish you a world of luck, and I will stay optimistic with you.
Thank you very much.
All right.